Welcome to the American Neighbor Project, your favorite new podcast. Welcome back to the American Neighbor Project, a podcast where we share real stories that reminds us how far more in common we have than that divides us. No matter our politics, backgrounds, or beliefs, most of us are simply doing the best that we can for the people we love and to make it through the best in life that we can. Sometimes that ends up with everyday people going into extraordinary situations and outcomes. Today's conversation is a powerful one. It's about alcohol and substance abuse. Please be aware if this impacts you personally before we get too deep into it. Let me give you some statistics to frame up how big of an issue we're talking about. According to the federal data from the CDC, roughly 1 in 6 Americans, or almost 49 million people, are affected by substance abuse. This has an even bigger impact than that. Nearly 1 in 4 American children, about 19 million kids, live in a household where at least one parent struggles with substance abuse. Our guest today is Dr. Brenda Fann Katula. She is a physician, was a hospital administrator, mother, and someone whose life journey has been shaped by deep hardship because of this issue. On paper, Brenda has built a life of service and leadership in healthcare. But behind the professional success was a family quietly struggling with alcoholism, mounting stress, and eventually profound loss. Today, Brenda has recovered from the issue, but is forever impacted. She now channels her experience into addiction ministry, which is how I learned about her extraordinary story. She now helps guide other people who are navigating the same painful road that she once traveled. Welcome to the show, Brenda.
Well, thank you for having me, Jeremy.
Absolutely. So aside from both our sons both being pole vaulters, I knew of your amazing work from our church at Lord of Life in a ministry that you started called Unshakeable. When I approached you about the interview, you were all in and you told me that you had been on podcasts before, specifically Dr. Casey Grover's podcast, Addiction Medicine Made Easy, Fighting Back Against the Addiction. As a podcast junkie myself, I listened in to prep for today's interview. All I can say after listening to that is, wow, what an extraordinary story you really have. I'm excited today for this conversation, but I have said far too much so far. For our listeners meeting you for the first time, who are you in your own words?
Sure. So, as Jeremy said, my name's Brenda Fann Katula. I am first a mom. I have 2 wonderful children and 3 stepchildren. I am a physician. I'm a family physician and work currently as a hospitalist, which means I see patients in the hospital from brand newborns all the way up until, our 100-year-old patients, all ages in between. And then I teach family medicine residents, which is really a lot of fun. I absolutely love teaching, and that's just, it doesn't even feel like work to teach them. And then I'm a wife. I remarried after my husband, who had died from his alcoholism, passed. And so I'm a wife again and in a wonderful marriage now. And last but not least, I'm unabashedly a Christian. I think you know that. And I'm currently getting my master's in biblical and theological studies. So that, in a nutshell, is who I am. I will also
That's a
add,
pretty big nutshell.
I will also add that I am a St. Louis Cardinals fan, despite living in Northern Illinois in Cubs territory. And I love being outside and love reading and just really enjoy a lot about life.
All right. Well, good for the listeners to meet you here.
I'm glad
So-
you didn't disconnect me when I mentioned Cardinals. I'm not sure if you're a Cubs or Cardinals fan. But...
Oh, I can edit that out. It's no problem. So what was it that first drew you towards medicine?
I think I always wanted to be a doctor. I actually have a 2nd grade project that we did in school, still saved. My mom had saved it for me. And we had to interview a classmate and then write a little story about them. And mine has on the front cover my friend drew like a hypodermic needle and actually put a pin in and glued a pin there to be the actual needle of it. So evidently I wanted to be a doctor back when I was in second grade, but I love science. I know I'm a dork. I absolutely love school. Love school. I get all excited when the number 2 pencils come out at the grocery store, getting ready for back to school. And and just I love helping people too, and I think those things just naturally flowed into being a doctor. And I don't think I ever thought I was going to do anything else. Although for a brief time when I was in grade school, I did want to be a cowboy or a figure skater as well.
Right. So as a doctor today, what does a typical day look like for you?
So right now, I work part-time. So depending on what I'm doing, either hospitalist or the residency, it looks just a little bit different, but I'll tell you a day as a faculty attending with the residents. If you watch the shows like ER or Scrubs, those kind of shows, they have the mean attending who's always yelling at the residents. That's my job. I'm one of those attendings but I don't really yell at them very often at all, really. But I get to the hospital and I look through the charts of my hospitalized patients. And like I said, sometimes I have brand new newborns who literally just popped out, half hour ago. Those are always a lot of fun to see. And sometimes a lot of patients who are up to, early 100s. So all those ages. And I'll look through the charts and then the residents and I will do some teaching rounds on some sort of a topic. And then we'll go hit the floors, as we say, and we'll see the patients and review how they're doing, come up with a diagnosis, a plan, and then they'll put that into action. I'll double check all their work. Ultimately, I'm responsible for all the patients as the attending. But while we're caring for these patients, I'm also teaching them how to be family medicine physicians in the hospital. It's busy when I do call with them. It's really busy. I'm woken up multiple times overnight with any new admissions that come in or any problems, but it's really, really fun.
Okay. Can we start early in your story here? Kind of explain how your marriage started out and how things looked in the beginning?
Sure. So I think if I'm honest, I think he had a drinking problem at the time we got married. And I think that um, certainly played a role in the early part of our marriage. I suspected, but I don't think I realized how perhaps bad it was at the time, or I certainly didn't realize how bad it was going to get. But um, there was a lot of drinking on weekends. I mean, we still did things, we would go traveling and work around the house and on the yard and such. But I started to notice, he would stay up later drinking. I'd go to bed at a reasonable time and get up kind of at a reasonable time, but he would be sleeping in later and later. And so his sleep cycle got shifted a little because he'd stay up drinking and then sleep, and I think not feel so good the next morning. And um, that was, um, your early marriage, marriage all along is just supposed to be happy bliss, right? But early on, I think that cast just a little bit of a shadow on our marriage at the beginning because I was starting to feel a little uneasy.
Okay. And that sounds like it started very early.
Yeah, pretty much right away. So, we got married in the fall, and well, I'm sure you have some questions about it, but by that next summer, on the anniversary of the family car crash that I think really started a lot of his trauma and was the source of pain from which I think he drank, that anniversary was the first time I was with him over the anniversary of that accident. And he just, I could tell there was a start of, well, it was my first recognition that he has some depression because he just laid on the couch like for days, didn't go to work, and was
And
just
this
a
anniversary
different
that you're talking
person.
about is something that happened before you were married?
Correct. correct.
Okay.
And I can tell you about that now if you want. It might make more sense to explain what happened. But when he was younger, he was 10, and his mom, dad, older sister, and two younger siblings were all in a car with another couple. And this is back in the day where we all had those really, really big sedans, not like the low compact cars now. This is back in the 70s. And they got into a car accident on a sunny August day, single car accident, and everybody in the front seat died, and that would be his mom, dad, and older sister. He and his
Mm,
two younger siblings and the couple in the back seat survived the accident. He and his two siblings ended up ultimately at Mooseheart, which is a child orphanage, and it's a large complex. And back at that time, they separated kids based on age and sex. So he's in a new home all of a sudden. It means their life changes overnight with other boys in his grade and age. His sister's in another building housed with girls her age and grade and so on. And so it his whole life changed in a matter of, one afternoon. And I think that trauma is really what started his depression and struggles with that, and ultimately, I think, led to that self-medicating with alcohol.
mm.
So it was the anniversary of that car accident, so in August, where I noticed, okay, he has not truly gotten over grieving from this accident or being able to move forward from it in a more healthy, productive way.
And so at first, you probably thought that that was something small, and then you noticed it growing over time.
Yes, I did. And with it, his drinking escalated, and my concern, of course, grew more then too.
I tend to, when things crop up in my life, I kind of dismiss them. But as a doctor, did you jump right to a diagnosis, or how does that look with training that you had?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because, there's a reason we don't take care of our family members because it's very hard to be objective, right? And so, I suspected some depression and anxiety. Clearly, there was an alcohol problem. I don't know that I would have said he was an alcoholic or have an alcohol use disorder that early in the marriage, but clearly it was obvious to me that he was self-medicating with alcohol. And I did talk with him about that and encouraged him to see a counselor, see a doctor. I thought counseling would be helpful. We went together a couple times, but we never continued going, and he never wanted to continue going. And I don't know exactly why. Um, he would always say that he didn't like that particular counselor. There was something about that person that bothered him. But I think deep down, the reality is it was too uncomfortable and too painful to even bring it all up. And so I think
Yeah,
he was avoiding going through it. And, I think people follow the path of least resistance for the most part, right? I mean, when you're in pain and things are difficult, um, you know, are you going to choose to go down the road that makes it harder and more painful and just resurfaces all those memories? And I think in his situation, it was just easier to go that way and self-medicate with alcohol because it offered a quicker fix and a quicker way to feel better in the short term, even though in the long term it was just making things more problematic. But I think that going down that road to address the reason for his depression anxiety was just too painful.
yeah. Especially when you don't want to address it because you don't know what it's going to lead to.
Right, right. It's scary.
Yep.
It's just a little scary. So I think in his situation, it was just easier for him to self-medicate.
So it it escalated over time, and then when I listened to the other podcast, you had talked about a neighbor
Mhm.
that offered a safe place for your kids, and I that resonated with me. Obviously, the podcast is about being neighbors, so can you kind of talk about that and what she offered and what that impact was on you?
Yes. So, we're now jumping ahead years to his alcohol use disorder is very severe at this point, and his blood alcohol levels the couple times that he was in the ER were at a level where 50% of people will die from that alcohol level. So
Holy cow.
as a physician, I'm not trying to exaggerate it. I mean, this is just the reality of his tolerance that had built up over time. And he was still walking and talking with that blood alcohol level. So that tells you he has an incredible tolerance built up, and his disease is very severe at that point. And I, I should say first, he was a good man. He was a kind man. Anything that I'm saying that may sound negative is about the disease. Alcohol use disorder and addiction in general is it's just an awful, awful disease. So just to be clear, he's a good man with an awful disease, and that disease just ate away at the good parts of him. And so I don't want it to sound like I'm saying anything bad about him. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Because it's really important that I think the people listening understand these are people just like us. We all have issues, we all have problems, and for whatever reason they handled them in a very maladaptive way, but they're still good people who just have an awful disease that changes them. And at that point, I couldn't trust him. I couldn't trust that he wouldn't pick up the kids from daycare, that he wouldn't drive with them. I was constantly worried that he was going to take them away. He would threaten that he would take the kids, and I was very, very scared about that. The kids were everything to me, and I also worked 45 minutes away from home, so I had a long commute to work and back from work. And as a physician, of course, if there's a family emergency, I would drop everything and leave. But I also had 45 minutes to get back home, and I was always so scared he would just get them from daycare and I wouldn't see my kids again. And I needed to know that my kids could go somewhere safe. And it had gotten to the point where the kids were even concerned about driving with him. And they knew, I never let them get in the car with him ever drunk. And they knew,
How old were your kids at that point?
so when he died, which was they were about 10 and 13. So we're talking at this time with the neighbor story, they're probably like grade school, middle grade schoolish, maybe second grade and fourth or fifth, something like that. So still fairly young, but I needed to know that they had a safe place to go if he was intoxicated and they were at risk. And so I called my neighbor one morning, and previously our interactions had been just, walking down the street, talking about flowers and plants, or, dog sitting her dog, things like that. The kids would help with the dog sitting. And I called her in the morning on the way to work, and I was just sobbing. I was very distraught because I was really, really scared that day. And I said, you know, if my kids need a safe place to go, sorry, I'm getting choked up. Can they just go into
Understandably.
your garage? And they had a garage that had a door for their dog to go in and out. So I knew the kids would be able to get in there and find a safe place to hide. I also knew he wouldn't think to look for them there. And I said, just if things get really bad and if I need to tell them where to go, is that okay with you if you're not home? And she said, I mean, she didn't even ask me why or what. She didn't hesitate at all. She just said, absolutely. And if I'm home, they can come in the house and I'll take care of them until you can get there. Sorry, I still get choked up about this, Jeremy.
Yeah, I
It's been
can't
such a
imagine.
long time. But just knowing that my kids had a safe place to go with someone that would take care of them until I could get to them meant the world. So, okay, I'm going to wipe my eyes now.
Yeah.
But
Mother to mother, I'm sure that was a very powerful moment.
yeah, it really, there's just the kindness of somebody who understands somebody's desperate and is truly calling out and desperately needing help, and she just didn't hesitate. I'll be forever grateful.
And and that's why I want people to hear your story, right? Because when you're in the moment, I think you can explain things away, but, if somebody hears your story, it can help them understand the gravity of the situation and maybe start to realize that you might need to take some steps to control things in on your terms and keep kids safe or yourself safe, depending on the circumstances. So thanks for
Right.
sharing that. I'm sure it
No,
was tough.
you're welcome.
So were there other moments like that where people stepped in to help you and encourage you?
Absolutely. There were lots of moments like that. Just I like what you're doing with your podcast, that it's about neighbors and about how we have much more in common than you think, and about, I think, it brings up this concept, I think, of more community and support rather than you feeling isolated or alone. That concept of neighbor is really important. And um, you know, Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. And I can't tell you how many times it was just basic kindness. And I can't emphasize it enough. Just basic, ordinary kindness from either strangers or people I knew, that just in a time in my life where it was just bleak and dark and not good, just to have these little bright spots throughout the day of people just simply being nice meant the absolute world. And there, my church, I think we've talked about this before, but I have an incredible church community. I just an amazing group of people. Our pastor has a good heart. Our leaders there care. They will call and reach out and check on you. And throughout all of it, I felt like they were always there. And we have so I had some folks in our congregation who are recovering alcoholics, and I was able to reach out to them. We had some other folks in the church who were friends with my husband, and when we needed to do an intervention one time, I asked if they would want to come over and be part of that, and they didn't hesitate. They were right there, with love and care and a genuine wanting to help. I had this problem in the barn with this electrical wire sticking out. It just made me nervous. I was able to ask someone in our church to come help with that. When he passed away, our barn was full of a lot of junk and needed to be cleaned out. And people from the church they came over and helped me. I had meals. I can't tell you how many meals. And it's no secret in our church that I cannot cook at all. I lead Bible studies at our church, and they all know that. But people would bring meals and just show up. And they finished a tree house, which I can tell you about that if you want. But the the community of believers and the neighbors, just amazing people.
Yeah, I mentioned politics on this podcast, and I don't ever intend to talk about things in a direct political way with people because I think people just go to their corners and nobody's minds change. But I I I want people to hear these stories, these life events because we're voting about some of these things, the support that people need. There's, decisions if the government should be involved in it or not. But I want people to think about like, okay, we talk about these conceptually and what it would cost to do certain things politically, but hear the people behind it and understand, you know, what the root cause of the issue is, and then people can decide, is this something the government should or shouldn't be involved in? So there are political issues discussed, but I don't ever want to talk about them directly because I think I need to bring things down to the human level.
Yeah, I agree. And when I'm a nervous flyer on an airplane, to be honest. I love traveling, but I don't like the plane flight to get to where I'm
Yeah.
going. And when I was interviewing for residency, I had to take some flights, and one was exceptionally turbulent. And there was this older gentleman sitting one row in front of me across the aisle, and I think he could tell I was alone. I was flying alone, and he was very kind to me and the people around us who were nervous about the turbulence, and it was pretty bad. And when we landed, I said to him, I just thank you so much because you really kept my focus off the turbulence and you really helped me get through that flight. And he just looked at me and tilted his head and he said, I said, thank you for being so kind. And he said, isn't that what we're just supposed to do for each other? And I thought, wow, you're like a guardian angel. It is what we're all supposed to do for each other. And I agree. I think people get caught up too much in the differences. And you're right, they go to their respective corners, but we're way more similar than we are dissimilar. Way more similar. We all have our struggles and we all have our hurts. And one of the things that, just to do a little bit of math here. So you quoted some statistics from the CDC about how common addiction is. And very similar statistics from the US Department of Health and Human Services. But last calendar year, 16% of Americans over the age of 12 battled an addiction. That's 16% over the age of 12. And that includes drugs and alcohol. It does not include other addictions. There's other addictions that are just as bad: gambling, sex, porn, spending. And the behaviors and patterns of someone with an addiction tend to be very similar. So those families and the loved ones around them are struggling much in the same way that I did with my family. And you know, if you do complicated math here, we make it really simple. 1.6 people out of 10 is 16%. And for every one of those 1.6 people, they have parents, they have a spouse, they have children, they have siblings. Very easy. Every person with addiction has at least 3, 4, 5 people around them that are close members of their family that are being impacted. And so you figure 1.6 plus at least 5, the majority of people are impacted by addiction, and it's the horribleness of that disease. And as I was very reluctant to speak up about what I was going through, primarily because of my job, which you're welcome to ask me about if you'd like, but I was worried I was going to lose my job. And so I didn't share and I didn't talk with a lot of people. And when I ultimately did start to tell people, you're working on a Bible study. Well, what's it about? Oh, you wouldn't be interested. I mean, it probably doesn't apply to you. It's about, strengthening your faith when your loved one has addiction. And I can't tell you how many people looked at me and said, my husband's, drinks, or, my wife has an addiction. I mean, so many people were like, oh, yeah, we know exactly what you're going through. We're going through it too. So we're way more similar than I think we are dissimilar.
How do you recommend somebody suspects there may be something going on in their family with the family member? How do you recommend bringing it up to start to address it?
It's a great question. And I think it depends on the person. But drawing on both my professional experience as a physician and my personal experience with dealing with this, I think coming at it from a place of true concern. The Bible says, speak the truth in love. Coming at it from a genuine place of love, concern, and care, compassion. I think asking and even using such words like, I'm worried, I'm concerned, I'm nervous for you. This is what I'm seeing. What do you think? I think starting with that rather than accusing, you're drinking too much or you're doing this too much, which, believe me, I made all the mistakes. Okay. So, I didn't handle it perfectly at all. And if I could go back and change the way I handled it, I certainly would. But I think to draw on starting from a place of concern, being concrete with what you're seeing, not just, I think you're drinking too much, but I noticed you went through a whole handle of rum in 2 days, and that's too much. It's worrying me. And asking, I think, why they're drinking and if they're interested in quitting, and recommending that they get help. I think um, I think for someone who has an addiction, to be able to admit that they have an addiction. Okay, let's be honest. When you go to the dentist every 6 months and they ask if you brush and floss twice a day, every day, we all know the
All the
answer to
time.
that
I
is
swear.
yes. Is yes. When I go to get my blood drawn and the phlebotomist asks me if I'm fasting, I'm like, at one time she looked at me, she goes, "Are you really?" And I said, "Why? Do you still see chocolate on me?" I mean, you know what the right answers to these things are. And it's difficult to say, no, I don't floss twice a day, every single day, because you're going to be told, well, that you're not supposed to do that. And so I think it's hard to admit something when you know you're going to be I don't want to use the word reprimanded, but corrected when you know the answer's wrong, right? So I think it takes a lot for someone who has an addiction to be able to admit it. I think that's difficult. None of us want to admit when we're struggling or doing, something we know isn't right. Um, so that makes it tricky. Does that make sense?
I think just understanding the issue in general is tricky, both for the alcoholic and those that are affected by it. I know in my experience, it's probably not the best way to think about it, but I my observation, I see that person making the choice to to go to it all the time, even though I know it's really powerful. It's a controlling addiction. It's very hard for me to separate and not think that they're making the choice to go to it.
You
You
know,
opened up in the beginning here saying your husband was a good man. He was just affected by a terrible disease. I think that's probably a better way to think about it than the way I do. But it's
I don't disagree with you, Jeremy. I hear what you're saying about making a choice, and I felt like that all along. So there were these two parts to me, and you asked earlier if being a physician helped make the diagnosis easier, or I struggled with being the wife of someone with an alcoholic use disorder who is really living the irrationality of the disease and seeing all the horrible parts of the disease, um, versus being the physician who understands the science of it. And I think those two things head-butted for me quite a bit. So, as the wife, I can't fathom how he's choosing a bottle of rum over me and the two kids. And the word choice, which you just used, to me it was a choice. You're choosing to drink. You're choosing to throw our marriage away. You're choosing to throw our family away. You should make a better choice. There is really that part, that logic that you go through. And then the physician side of me understands the science of the disease, which is the majority of folks who have an addiction, mental illness and addiction tend to go hand in hand, right? So people will drink or use drugs to self-medicate because there's some sort of pain, there's some sort of trauma, there's something. And I think initially it is a choice, right? I feel bad. This is a quick fix. It just makes it easy right now. But as that disease gets worse and worse and worse, and then you get the whole dopamine cycle in the brain, it gets to the point where it's uncontrolled. They can't control it, and that's where they really do need medical help to get better. And even though I understood that at home as a wife, the choice thing was a big thing, and that's why my predominant emotion during all of this was anger. I was
mhm,
mad that he was making that choice. I think that's a very difficult thing for people to understand.
yeah.
So I I I I hear what you're saying.
So, what kind of toll does that take on you? You're under, extreme stress, worried about your children, you're angry all the time. What kind of toll does that take on you physically?
Uh, a bad one.
Yeah, I'm
Uh, it
sure.
it was really rough, and I don't, I know, it was hard. The physical toll, so there was uh, it just affected everything, right? So it affected me mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and I think the mental, emotional, and spiritual effects all also dump onto the physical effects because there is a big mind body connection. And, one, I'm not sleeping real well. Um, because there's a lot of disruption. He's coming in late to bed, and it's just a lot of it's difficult to sleep. And then when you get woken up, and I'm mad, I'm getting woken up, and I'm on call, and I'm gonna get woken up on call, and again the anger. Hard just for me to sleep when I am so distressed and upset. Your mind's racing, thinking about all these things. So I had very poor sleep, which led to very poor eating. I ended up losing quite a bit of weight and was underweight to the point where I had colleagues coming up to me at work to ask me if I was okay. I mean, there were people who really thought I had some new severe illness because I had lost so much weight. Um, Constant headaches, when those muscles in your neck get so tight, I think, and I'm not exaggerating, I think the majority of the time I couldn't turn my head because I had such muscle tension. I would just have to turn everything. Um, and A lot of nausea. My stomach was always upset. Um, yeah, a lot of things. It's really good to feel physically better now. In all honesty, I gained back some weight and eat better, and I sleep. But it was a rough time physically for sure.
So, as a doctor, did you recognize that, or were you just in a survival mode?
Good question. I wish I could tell you that I was smart enough to see it for what it was at the time, but I was truly in survival mode. And I was thinking about it today, and before we jumped onto this podcast together, I was thinking about, how have you ever gone on a corn maze, like one of those ones in the fall? And
No.
they're pretty good. Like, you're lost in there, right? There's all these different ways, and you really can't figure how to get out. And that's how I think I felt the whole time. And I wish I had known then what I know now and could have sort of, you know, taken a higher view of it and seen the maze for what it was and figured out how to get out in a healthier, more productive way. But I was just really trapped in that maze in survival mode. I mean, I had at that point, I'm working full time. I'm an assistant vice president in a hospital, so I have a lot of stress. I have a lot of work. I'm driving 45 minutes each way. I'm terrified about losing my job because I'm the
Yeah.
only one working. It's the only way we have benefits. I was also getting my MBA, so I'm doing school as well, leading Bible studies at church. I'm trying to get to all the kids' sporting things, trying to make life normal for them. And it was really just
How in the
survival
world do
mode.
you pull all
I
that off?
Yeah, I really don't think I realized at the time how I could have made it a little easier on myself. I wish I had been smarter. But I was just trying to keep it all together and trying to not let it affect my life, if that makes any sense. I mean, that's all it
Yeah,
was doing, was
just trying to
affecting
get
my
by the
life.
best that you can, yeah.
Well, I also wanted to keep doing the things that I thought I was supposed to be doing. I wish I had taken a semester off of school. I wish I had taken some time off from leading the Bible studies. Just some of those things to give myself a little more space and breathing room.
Yeah, so I suspected that, you say you wish you were smarter. I don't think it's an issue of smartness. I think it's that tunnel vision that you get in. So I kind of asked that on purpose so that somebody listening who is dealing with that can listen to this and hear, oh yeah, being nauseous and angry and tired all the time. And it's not normal. It's something that's brought upon you.
Yeah. It's and and I will say a lot of it, I probably if I had availed myself more, I think of with counseling during that time and learned perhaps better skills on how to manage it, not manage his alcohol use because that's impossible to do. Only he can do that. But to manage my reactions to it and learn how to respond better, I think I could have saved myself a lot of misery.
So you mentioned that mind and body connection. What does this experience teach you about the mind body connection in times of trauma?
Well, in my personal experience, um, I would say not as I'm not talking as a physician now. I'm just talking as someone who went through this. Um, I It's obvious that the role that the mind and emotions have on you physically, and it was so bad for me. And I went to my doctor because I was convinced I had a gallbladder problem that was making me nauseated and causing the headaches. And I was diagnosing myself, right? I think it's this, I think it's that. And I go in there and I think she suspected there was none of my physical complaints really fit together to make one neat diagnosis. All of my physical complaints that I had were clearly the result of stress. I mean, if a patient came to me as a physician with those complaints, it'd be really obvious to me in my doctor role. But as the patient, again, it's hard to see what you're going through at the time. And I don't think I recognized, well, I clearly didn't recognize it at all, but my own physician did. And she did a great job during the office as leading me to the conclusion that everything I was experiencing was all stress related. And once I no longer had to deal with the alcohol use, um, all those symptoms magically went away. So it was very eye opening to me to see how powerful that mind body connection was.
So she led you to that conclusion?
Yeah, I think if she had just looked at me and said, "Oh, I think this is all stress," I probably would have argued and said, "No, it's my gallbladder, it's this, it's that." So she was very savvy. She knew just how to deal with me. She said, "Oh, you're nauseated all the time. Oh, how's your sleep? Are you eating well? Oh, your weight's changed. Oh, you're still nursing your baby and doing all this? Wow, you're busy. Do you think you're busy?" She just kept reflecting back to me. And she's like, "Do you think this could be stress?" And by the time we finished going through all these questions, she basically had me answer affirmatively to a billion questions where I'm like, yeah, it must be stress. But it was very clever. It was a very clever way to do it, especially with a fellow physician, right? Because we don't, I trained in medicine back in the day before there were what's called work duty hours. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. Nowadays, the there's something in residency training called work duty hours, meaning you can't work 50 hours in a row straight with no sleep. The maximum time you can work is 24 hours before you have to have a break of at least 10 hours before you come back to work. Back when I trained in residency, there were no such rules. So I would be on call starting at 6 a.m., say on a Monday morning. I'd be on call 24 hours and then have to work that next day. So I'd get home like Tuesday night. And I was trying to explain this to my dog sitter. He was like, "No, no, no, you'll come home Monday night." I'm like, "No, no, no, I won't be home till Tuesday night." He's like, "When will you sleep?" I'm like, "I don't get any sleep. I'll be up for like a day and a half." So we didn't get these breaks, these built-in times to sleep like they do now. And so we were trained to, you didn't complain. When in medical school and residency, you'd be in the OR maybe for like a long case. Maybe you're in the OR for like 7 hours. You would never admit I have to go to the bathroom or I'm hungry. You just plowed through it. You just didn't take a break. And I think that was my training in medicine. So to ask for help or to say I'm struggling, like that had been trained out of me. It was like boot camp. It had been trained out of me. And those were things you just didn't admit. You just kept going. And that's what I did. That's how I survived this, was using those skills I learned in residency training. Just plug away and keep going.
So that doctor kind of helps you realize it's, stress is taking a toll on you.
Oh, she helped me a ton.
How do you do you get angry at that point, or do you feel a sense of relief that, oh yes, this is definitely what it is? Like I could see myself getting angry if I'm trying to avoid that and all of a sudden it's in my face. I think
Yeah, so that's
I,
uh,
I wonder how.
actually it was a sign of relief because I felt validated. I suspected probably deep down it was stress, but I didn't want to admit it. Right? I don't want to admit that things are that bad at home, that it's causing me all this. I felt like I should be better able to handle it. It shouldn't affect me physically. It's that whole I feel I felt a little bit like I was a failure because I wasn't able to handle it so well. Does that make sense? I felt like I was failing because it was affecting me physically. And I think that's for people who are going through this. I think that's a good thing for them to hear, right? You're not, just because it's affecting you doesn't mean you're failing at handling it. These are awful times and we're human and it is going to impact us. I don't think I wanted to admit that, if that makes sense. So when
Mhm,
she had kind of guided me to admit out loud that this was probably just a result of everything that was going on at home, it was almost like this burden had been lifted. I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to act like I could handle it all around her. She knew the truth. And I just felt I honestly felt a sense of relief. I'm like, oh, someone else who's a rational human being is looking at my situation and saying, you have a lot going on. And that having someone validate that lent so much credibility to what I was experiencing. Because, have you heard the term gaslighting?
mhm, yep,
So for your listeners who may not know what that is, I think it's been coined in the psychology field, if I'm not mistaken, and it's when somebody kind of convinces you that something is a reality that's really not. Okay, so for example, in my situation, um, you know, I knew how much rum was in that bottle, right? I knew how much was in there when I went to bed. And, when I wake up in the morning and I see how much is gone, and I'm like, accusing, and you drank way too much of it. No, I didn't. There wasn't that much left in that bottle. You're thinking about a bottle from a few weeks ago. Last night's bottle only had that much to start. And I'm like, no, it had that much. No, it only had that much. And it's so convincing that you start to think you're crazy. Like, oh, maybe I do have that wrong. And I would drive to work and think, I'm an intelligent person. I know 1 + 1 = 2, but I feel like I'm being convinced 1 + 1 = 3. Like it's just not making sense. And you
mhm.
start to doubt yourself. And so for her to lend some credibility and validation of what was happening was just just a big relief. So I wasn't angry. I was glad that I wasn't going crazy.
So how did you deal with it at that point? Like you realize something's really wrong. Like what do you do to move forward then?
You mean for my physical symptoms? Well, I still
Mhm.
didn't handle it very well. Yeah, I,
You just
you know,
knew it
I,
was there.
I just knew it was there. I felt better having someone tell me you're not crazy. In all seriousness, I, I think I still struggled a lot with it. I felt very trapped. I didn't feel like I had a lot of options. I had to keep working. So the work stress wasn't going to go away. And if anything, what I needed to do with work was maneuver from one position into a different position, because for part of this time earlier on, I was the program director in a family medicine residency program. And I had residents under me. I was responsible for 3 budgets. I had a clinic I was responsible for, patient care. There were a lot of things that I was responsible for that followed me home, where the work never ended. And I
Uh,
needed to get out of that job into a different position where I could leave it on my desk and go home, where it was more paperwork rather than patient work, if that makes sense.
uh,
So I ended up getting the assistant vice president role, which gave me that paperwork part where, if I had an emergency or had to leave early for some reason, to get the kids, at least it was paperwork that I could leave. It wasn't a sick patient or a problem when I was the residency program director. So that was one thing I did to try to decompress. It sounds like it made it worse by going into a higher level role, but actually what it did was alleviate a lot of immediate stress at work. And that was really the only change I made. The rest of the things I just kept plugging along, because there wasn't much more I could do to get out of those. I needed the MBA to keep that role. And remember, back at that time, I don't know that he's ultimately going to die from his disease. So in my mind, I suspected
yeah,
he
something
would,
temporary.
but I had to get my MBA so that I could keep that higher level role and possibly get a different one that would be even better, just so I could provide for our family and have the assurance of benefits and all of that. So I didn't feel like I could stop that pressure. The kids are in Awanas. I'm teaching them at Awanas. The faith part of this was incredibly important to me. And I didn't want to stop taking them to Awanas or teaching Awanas. I wanted to be part of their faith journey and faith education. So there really wasn't much that I felt I could pare down, if that makes sense.
Uh, yeah, I just keep hearing you were pushed forward the whole time and everything that you're saying.
Right. I was trying not to just go backwards.
Yeah. So eventually it comes to a head and he passes, unfortunately. What do you, when that moment arrives, how do you move forward from there?
So, you know, th that's another really good question. Well, first of all, you just do, right? You have no choice. You have to move forward. But how to move forward, um, that was that's tricky. So, you know, he had died over a Memorial Day weekend, and in January of that year, my daughter had looked at me and she said, "I don't think Daddy's going to be here by Christmas." I think the
Yeah.
kids could see that he was getting sicker. And I said, I don't think he's going to be either. And while I was sad, of course, sad and bothered that my kids are having to think through these things, at the same time, there's a little bit of relief that they have some insight, even as young as they were, to recognize that things are not good. And he had started to lose a lot of weight as well, because all he was doing was drinking. And at that point, he weighed probably less than I did. And as I said, I was already underweight because of all the stress, but he was a 6'2" guy who was probably weighing about 120s, 130s. So
Oh
he
my
was
gosh.
really,
Wow.
really, really uh, thin, and actually quite malnourished at that point. And I had not noticed that. My mom had come over and he was standing in shorts, and she just said, "Oh my gosh, you've lost so much weight." And I remember turning to look. I thought, when, like, it just happened so gradually, and all of a sudden he's so thin. Um, so and needless to say, things are incredibly bad during all this time. Lots of sheriffs and police coming over and restraining orders and all sorts of things like that. And so I honestly felt as if at this point I have no hope left. I really just am full of despair because I don't see that he's ever going to stop drinking. His disease was so bad. And he had done 30-day rehabs and, all of that. And everything was unsuccessful. He had been on a ventilator in the ICU for withdrawal symptoms. He was a severe, severe alcoholic. And I just never, at that point, I was reconciled to the fact that he's never going to recover, that there's just no hope left. So when he passed, there were two very different things that happened. For me, and I don't want this to sound bad, so please don't take it this way. But for me, I knew at that point, I don't have to deal with the real life day-to-day alcohol anymore. So on some level for me, there was a bit of relief that this is ended. I don't have to deal, the disease is done. Unfortunately, it destroyed and killed him as well. But the disease is so devastating that there was just a sense of relief that he's no longer suffering with this, and we no longer have to
There's no
suffer
more
with this.
pending doom. Yeah.
Yeah, the impact on my family, on me and the kids, was so much during all of this that I felt like, okay, now we can start rebuilding and resetting our lives again. I can, I can parent the kids in a much healthier way now. I'm not going to be angry anymore at him. They're not going to overhear the constant fighting and see the drunkenness and see all the problems that come with it. So there was that sense of relief that, okay, now we can move forward. And so that was for me. And at the same time, then for the kids, I knew there was going to be a lot of I didn't know quite what to expect with them. I mean, I knew there'd be grief, there'd be anger, I knew there'd be challenges, when your dad dies. And so I was very careful and I kept my eyes on them all the time, to be there and help them with what I was worried about emotionally for them.
And then you said the church was a big support to you, came in with meals and other support. What what all did that look like, and I mean, why did that matter to you? I mean, I think that's probably an obvious question, but
No, it's a really good question, and with the meals, I'll add one thing. We have one of my son's friends. We've known them since the kids were in infant room and daycare together. And when she heard that he had died, uh, she was in our driveway immediately with, all those roasted chickens and from, the grocery store and trays of fruits and vegetables and salads. And she just opened up her van and just kept bringing food in. And I remember thinking, this is so nice. But I didn't realize how much we would need that because everyone descends upon your house to comfort you, which is wonderful, wonderful to have everybody there. And all that food's there, and I didn't have to worry about it. And one of my neighbors down the street, at the time, I'm like, wow, that's so coincidental. But now I realize it wasn't a coincidence at all. But she called me
yeah.
and she said, I just heard about Bob. What do you need from the store? I'm going to the, I'm going to, what did she say? I just came back from the grocery store. What do you need? And I said, oh, I think we're okay. No, please tell me what you need. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm out of laundry detergent and I really need syrup because the kids keep wanting well, all the cousins where everyone's making pancakes. I ran out of syrup. I think like Dawn dish soap or something. Like I just was out of a few things with everyone descending on the house. She's like, what a coincidence. I just got all that from the store today. Now I realize at first I thought, wow, that's amazing. She got exactly what I need. I think what she did was she ran to the store and bought it all for me and then brought it over, right? She just got my grocery list basically and picked up the things for me, which was amazing. But our church responded phenomenally. They were there with lots of meals, thank God. And even like months and weeks later, they didn't forget about us. I still had people bringing meals, and that was just fabulous. They, Bob had started a tree house. So during all of this, he decided to build an addition on our house. He was a carpenter remodeler, and which meant he wasn't working and was spending a lot of money buying materials, and he was paying someone to help him. So we had a lot of money going out, which is why I also felt a lot of pressure for work. But all of the extra building materials he decided he would use to build a treehouse. And he got it mostly done. So it's not truly built in the limbs of a tree. It's built under a tree, which is why it's called a treehouse. But it has true foundations and footings that are like cemented down, 10 feet or whatever. And it has siding and real windows and a real door. It has our old garage service door, shingled roof. I mean, it's like leftover. It's like a little mini shed made out of that matches our house. And he had not finished the stairs or the deck and a couple other parts of it. And that was a beautiful thing our church did. The response team that goes in and helps folks after tornadoes with chainsaws and cleaning up debris, they all came over and worked with a friend of ours who's a builder and Bob's brother, and they finished that for us. And it was really nice because it meant a lot to the kids because, he was building it for them. And it meant a lot to them. It made me very angry. Again, anger was a very common emotion because I was angry that he never finished it for them.
Eh,
There
Yeah.
was, and again, I think that was the disease. A lot of things got left undone because of his disease. And so I was angry that they had to finish it. And every time I looked at the treehouse, I would get angry because it was just this symbolic representation of something that he didn't finish because of his disease and because he died. And that just made me mad. And even though the church guys came over and fixed it, which was a beautiful thing, I still had that anger. And it took a long time for me to process the anger. Um, and once I did, I saw the treehouse not as this thing to be mad at, but the kids stopped using it because they had grown up, they're teenagers now, and they're not hanging out in the treehouse. And I needed a place to write my Bible studies and write the Unshakeable and work on all of that. So I took it over, and now I have this beautiful space that's amongst all the trees and leaves and all the birds, and I can sit up there and work on, ironically, the Bible study about strengthen your faith when your loved one has an addiction. So that
Is
treehouse
that the
came
space?
full circle.
Is that the space you're in now?
Oh no, this
Oh,
is
okay.
an office in the house.
Gotcha.
I don't get electricity out there, but it would be nice. An air conditioner would be really great in the summer.
Yeah, in August.
Yes.
So looking back now, what do you understand about that point in your life that you couldn't see while you were in it?
Uh, there's a lot. Hindsight is truly 2020. I think the biggest lesson of what I see now that I didn't see then, and I wish I had, I would have saved myself a lot of misery, is even when God didn't feel like he was near, he was absolutely there. And I was mad at God, really mad at him. Um, I told him too. He knew I was mad. and and um, I wish I was able to see what he was doing and how ultimately everything would have turned out. I mean, none of us can predict the future, but I wish I had that faith and trust in him to know that he is always in control, he always has a plan, and he knows what he's doing. And I felt like he wasn't doing it enough. Um, so I was going to take care of it. I would, um, I had to figure it out on my own, and I was desperately trying to control what was happening to us. But if I had only understood what it meant to totally trust in him and to trust in his will, I wouldn't have spent so much time worrying and causing myself all sorts of problems. In James chapter 1, it says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds. It doesn't say if you face trials. It says when you do. And it goes through and says, you're supposed to consider it joy because that testing of your faith is going to produce perseverance, and that perseverance is going to finish its work so you're mature and complete, not lacking in anything, so that you have that faith. And I see now when I encounter troubles or things where my instinct is to worry as a mom, like we all do, there is a part of me that is so much more secure in my faith that I can now step back and say, my children are God's children. And as much as I love them, and I think it's unfathomable to understand that God loves them even more than I do, but he does. And I don't even think, I can't understand as a mom how that's possible. Someone could love my kids more than I do, but I know he does. And he's taking care of them. So instead of spending so much time worrying now, I just pray and I trust he's going to take care of them, that he's got a plan, he's going to work it out for good. And I just wish I understood all of that back then. I think that would have helped me not feel so nauseated and have so many headaches. The second thing I wish that I knew was, or had seen and thought about, is I wish I would have recognized more quickly the toll it was taking on me and the kids. I think I would have changed some things that we did to keep us a little healthier mentally, emotionally, and physically. Whether that was taking time off of school, just putting the MBA on hold, getting us into counseling sooner, taking the time to do Al-Anon or something. I just never took the time to do that. I didn't feel like I had that time. I wish I had confided in close friends and asked for help. I was very, my mom and his sister and my sister, I could ask for help. But beyond that, I just didn't feel like I could be vulnerable and explain what was going on at home. And I wish I had done that, because I think I know for a fact there are many other people who were going through the same things, and I think we could have been a source of support and help for each other.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, my kids have taught me so much about myself and life. Like, what did your children teach you through all this? I mean, children are so resilient.
They are. I've learned a ton from my children too. um, I I will say, one day during all of this, I have okay, I'll just admit it. I love dark chocolate. I have I don't like milk chocolate. I can pass up any kind of regular chocolate, but when it comes to these particular type of chocolate chips, I have a problem. And I have a big Tupperware container, and I just dump the bags of chocolate chips in there so I can just grab a handful whenever I want. And my daughter was even saying yesterday how I've ruined milk chocolate for her, that she should only have the dark chocolate too. But this is probably, she's in 3rd or 4th grade, and I was getting that Tupperware out to have some chocolate, and this is when it was a bad day, and I dropped the Tupperware and chocolate chips go all over the kitchen floor. And she came to help me. I mean, it's a little thing. You drop some chocolate, a Tupperware container of chocolate chips, big deal.
Did you say, oh, fudge?
Oh, fudge. There's the chocolate chips flying over. But, when you're in a normal, healthy state of mind, you just, all right, I dropped the box of chips, and you clean it up. But for me, that was, probably a reason to say fudge, and
fudge. 3 times.
probably be really angry and frustrated, because it was a lot of anger and frustration on constant basis back then. And my daughter came over right away to help. And I think even as young as she was, I think she recognized that I was like, had it. And that chocolate chips spilling all over the kitchen floor was like, and I was at the end of my rope. And she came over and she said, Mom, just because you're having a bad day does not mean you have a bad life.
Oh my God.
And I thought, wow, that is so insightful, right? And she's right, right? There are, so many things to be grateful for. And I think during a lot of this, I lost sight of that. Paul tells us to pray constantly with thanksgiving, and he starts with thanksgiving. And I lost sight of the positive, good things in life. I think I just dwelled on the big negative thing rather than being grateful that there are a billion things for which we can be grateful, even in the midst of suffering. And so that was really insightful. That's one of the biggest lessons she taught me. My son has this amazing, good, gentle, kind heart, and he is very even keeled. And I think during all of this, he one time asked me, and he was younger, remember, so he's probably maybe 8, maybe 9 when he says this to me. But this was during one of the times I had his dad kicked out of the house, and he said, you know, why does Daddy drink if he says he loves us? And I, picked him up, put him on the kitchen counter, and I looked him in the eye, and I said, well, he does love us. I know he does. If we ask him, I know he does, but he just has a bad disease that makes it very difficult to show us. And he said, and he asked a couple more questions, and I said, you know what, buddy? I don't know how to answer your question. Honestly, I have the same question. I mean, I wrestle with that same question. And he said, oh, okay. And the fact that he had the maturity and insight to see and understand some of those concepts, I just found astounding. And it shows in how he treats people too. There's this gentleness to him that is just very special. But one of the other things they taught me, after their dad died, I said, we need to do something really fun, and we need to go on a vacation. And I said, and they had never been on an airplane. And I said, we should go on an airplane. Their dad had a lot of anxiety as well as depression. So he did not like to fly. He didn't like to go to big cities either. It was just his anxiety would creep back up. And so I said, where do you guys want to go? And I'm thinking we'll fly to Florida or, somewhere that's not too far since it's their first plane flight. And they decided they wanted to go out of the country. I'm like, well, okay. So we'll go to Mexico. And Mexico doesn't count. I don't know if you know this. It's not out of the country because it's attached. So they didn't see that as going out of the country. So they're like, we want to go, they're picking places in Europe. I said, you're crazy. I'm not taking you guys over the ocean for your very first plane flight. And my daughter came up with the idea to go to Iceland, and it's really not that long of a flight. And it's not really over the ocean. So I thought, we'll be fine. And because I saw Jaws when I was little, so I'm flying over the ocean was not something I was super excited about. But anyhow, we went to Iceland, and we just had the adventure of a lifetime. We just explored, and I have so many pictures of us sitting down having skyr cake. Skyr cake is like an Icelandic cake made from their skyr, which is like their yogurt, their Icelandic yogurt. It sounds gross, but we really liked it. It's like a special cheesecake. And I have so many pictures of us just sitting, having these unusual food, fermented shark and all sorts of odd foods, and just laughing. And it was a great way to, I think, reset things and, come back a little refreshed and, having a clear mind and some really good, happy times together. So, they taught me to to laugh again and just be adventuresome. We did a lot of things. I maybe they taught me as much as I taught them, but we had to figure out a lot of things by ourselves. So one time I had to figure out how to use the compressor to inflate something, and we're out there in the garage, and I'm like, "Do you guys know how to use this?" Now I didn't want to YouTube like how to do it, so we're just gonna try to figure it out ourselves. I'm like, I hope that doesn't explode, And when we persevered, and I think it goes like this, and we're all working together, and I think we learned from each other, like, just how to work together and problem solve together. And then we inflate this silly thing, and we're just all jumping up and down the garage because we did it. So um, we had a lot of moments like that, I think, learning together too, which were great.
That's good. You got some time to recover together. You've been through the ringer, but your response is to start an addiction ministry, Unshakeable. Where did that name come from, and what can you tell us about Unshakeable?
Okay, so that was not my idea. I want to be super clear about that. So I still remember I was on the treadmill at the gym just walking over lunch hour, and I was talking to someone from our church on the phone, and they said, you should really write a Bible study about this. And this is like 2 months after Bob had passed. And I said, you are crazy. There is no way I am writing a Bible study on this. I want to put this to bed. I want to just move forward. There's no way I want to go back and revisit any of this. And I knew I had always wanted to write Bible studies, and that conversation planted a seed that, I joke, God kept watering, and I kept putting Weed Be Gone on it, the kind that lasts permanently. God kept watering it, and I kept pulling up the little seedling, but ultimately he won. And there's some time, like a couple years after that I really felt called to write that study. It was an undeniable, I must do this now. And so I talked with the pastor at my church, and what I decided to do was write a chapter each month. So I'd write a chapter, lead it as a Bible study with a group of very adventuresome women who were willing to be part of this, not knowing what it was going to be like. And then I would make edits after we met, and I'd write the next chapter the next month, and so on until I had like 6 or 7 chapters. And the point of Unshakeable is how you can strengthen your faith when your loved one has an addiction. And there are so many unique challenges as a Christian when you're dealing with this. And some of the ones I struggled with, or knowing what to do. How do I love my neighbor as myself when I'm kicking him out of the house again with no credit cards and no money? How do I forgive repeatedly without it sounding like I'm enabling or excusing the behavior? How do I set boundaries and stick to them and not feel like I'm being mean? So many of those questions were going through my mind as a Christian, and I struggled to deal with it. And in your anger, do not let the sun go down on your anger. And the sun went down and came up the next day on my anger. And so there were a lot of things I struggled with from a faith perspective. Also, where's God in all of this, and why is he not answering my prayers? Now, there's a verse in John that says, if you ask for anything in my name, and it's according to his will, you will have it. Well, I'm asking for a healed marriage, a restored family. How can that not be God's will? How can it not? And it just felt like God kept saying no to my prayer for that. And like I said, I was mad at him about that. And for a little while, I turned away from my faith, which basically meant I didn't pray every day except for the Our Father. I mean, I still said the Our Father every day, but none of the personal prayers, because I wanted God to know I was really mad, right? And I laugh at that now, and you're kind of smirking at it. It's amusing, right? I was too scared to not pray and to ignore him completely. So when I did it at the church, it was that first time. It was, it was a good go at it, and I think we all learned a lot from our discussion. And I led 2 more workshops recently about it, and those had way more attendees. I made it for the community as well, and I had over 40 some people show up the first time, more people the second time. People were emailing, can I bring my friend? Can I bring my sister? I'm like, bring whoever you want. There were 2 people who were not related, but each drove 2 hours to get there for this because they had never had anything like this offered. There's a lot
Wow.
of resources, Christian resources for the one with the addiction. And there are some things for the loved ones, but I don't think there's a lot like what I'm doing. So, the word unshakable, I came up with that because I felt like the house in the parable that Jesus tells. So there's a parable he tells about a man who builds his house on rock and a man who builds his house on sand. And when the storms come, the man who built his house on sand, his house just collapses because his house is not built on anything sturdy or solid. The man who built his house on the solid rock, that house has a firm foundation, and when the storms come, that house survives. And the parable is meant to talk about, what are you building your life on? Are you building it on the solid rock that's God and Jesus and your faith and trusting in that? Or are you building it on something that's just not going to stand up? And that's what I was doing. So every relapse, every drunken night, every disaster at home, my proverbial house would just collapse and I would try to rebuild it again, and then it would get, hit another storm, or another storm would hit it and it would collapse. So as I went through the struggle with his addiction, I began to realize I can't keep doing this over and over again. It's destroying me to keep rebuilding this house. It's not lasting. And so what do I need in life? And I realized I needed to stop being mad at God. I needed to trust in his will and build that house on his solid rock, his foundation. And so that's where unshakable comes from, because that house, Jesus says, it's not shaken from the storms. And so that's where that comes from. It's interesting. It's so funny how things happen, but I was talking to a gentleman about a week or 2 ago, and it was a business conversation, and it turns to his faith, and he starts talking about his faith, and I said a couple things about mine, and he said, when I first met you, he said, I thought you were a believer. He said, I just had a sense about you. And he said, and you know what I thought of when I thought about you? He said, I thought about these verses from Psalm 112. And so he reads them to me, and this is what he read. Surely the righteous will never be shaken. They will be remembered forever. They will have no fear of bad news. Their hearts are steadfast, trusting in the Lord. And it has that they will not be shaken. And I thought, oh my gosh, like that's the Bible study I'm doing. It's what I'm trying to write, is that you're not shaken when these things come to shake your life. You will not be shaken. You will not have fear of bad news, and you'll have that steadfast heart, and you'll trust in the Lord. So where I am now with those studies, as I said, I'm working on my master's in biblical and theological studies. And for every class I have, my final paper is essentially a chapter of the book. So my final project, my final capstone project for my master's is going to be giving my advisor my draft of the book. And then hopefully getting it published. Again, I just think it's important that it wasn't my idea to write the book, right? It was God's idea. So I'll write it, but then I'm going to need his help in getting it published.
So what kind of topics do you cover in as a preview?
So I cover who you are, because when you have a loved one with an addiction, if they're telling you things, so again, bad disease. My husband's a wonderful person, but when he was drinking, sometimes people say things that I don't think they would mean when they're sober. But you start to feel, I think I mentioned you felt like a failure. I felt like a failure as a wife. I felt like a failure as a mom. Getting back to the root of who you really are in Jesus, in God's eyes, I think is important. That can never, ever change. No matter what anybody ever says about you or makes you feel, you are always a child of God and you are always precious and valuable in his eyes. And I think that's the first chapter, is let's establish who we are first. One of the other chapters is petitionary prayer, or the unanswered prayer, when you keep praying the same thing and God says, it seems like God's saying no or not yet. How do you deal with that? How do you learn that it's not about asking God for what you want as much as pray for that, but then also learn to see and discern what his will is in the midst of that prayer and what you're asking for. Anger is a big one. How do you not let the sun go down on your anger? Currently, forgiveness is 2 chapters. Forgiveness is a really difficult one. I can totally understand why Peter's like, so I just have to forgive like 7 times, 7 times. And then Jesus is like, no, you have to forgive like an infinite number of times. But I get why Peter asked that. And I've looked for every loophole that I possibly could about that would explain why I didn't have to forgive this. I really tried to find that, and there is no such loophole in the Bible where we are just simply called to forgive, and that's that. But, even now, if one of my kids has a struggle that I feel is related to their dad's issues from before, I will admit it resurfaces and I start to feel unforgiving towards him again. So, sometimes I have to work at that all over again to forgive him again. So that's another chapter. What else is there? The unanswered prayer, forgiveness, anger, who we are, boundaries. How to set boundaries. That's a really tough one. And I think that's a really important principle to go through, and to do it in as much of a Christ-like manner as we can. But that's very difficult. I'm actually working on that paper right now in school, is what biblical support is there for setting boundaries. And it's a challenging one for sure.
Hmm.
So all of the chapters have biblical support and are rooted in scripture completely.
It'll be good to see it published someday.
I hope so. I kind of keep telling God, it's your idea to write it, so help me. Let's help get it published.
Publisher will come.
I hope so.
It'll
I
be
think
a
there's,
coincidence.
yeah, yes. I think the writing it as a physician with an understanding of the disease
It's
and
a really
addiction,
unique
and
perspective.
and then writing it from a personal perspective, having gone through it. And it's not about the one with the addiction. It's about us and our faith in the setting of this situation. There's such a need for it.
Um, what do you think families that are dealing with alcoholism today, what do you think they most need to know?
Well, I would say first, if they're dealing with this, I'm sorry that they're going through that. For the person who has the addiction and their loved ones, I get how hard it is. I think to know, one, you're not alone. There are so many people who are struggling in exactly the same way. I think the second most important thing is to ensure safety. So for me, the big thing was making sure that he was not able to drive the kids. doing whatever I needed to do to make sure he could not pick them up from daycare. And I don't want it to sound like I let him drive when he was drinking. I did not. It's just I wasn't always around to know if he had been drinking, was driving. Um, and I did call the police one time on him because I knew he was intoxicated and driving, and I wanted them to pull him over before he hit somebody. They couldn't find him in time, but ensuring safety, domestic violence, abuse is never acceptable, and if you're experiencing
Yeah, it
that,
gets
I
right
would
into the
say,
boundaries
yeah, that you need to get help and get out of that situation immediately.
immediately.
There's we are never called to suffer uh, domestic abuse or uh, any sort of abuse like that. So making sure you and your kids or family members are safe. Um, and I would say getting help early. If you recognize and suspect that there's a problem, talking with a Christian counselor or a trusted counselor, a friend, somebody you can really trust um, to talk through it and help guide you with resources. Um, I think those things are really important. But to understand first and foremost, you are not alone. There is such a stigma that comes with this. That was one of the other things I was worried about speaking up was people would make assumptions about me because my husband had this problem. And I was worried that would impact my work. It would impact relationships, social relationships and things like that. Um, it, I think the more we all talk about it, the less the stigma is. I think mental health has now become a very commonly talked about thing. That stigma, I think, is going away because there's so much publicity and recognition of it. I think addiction's lagging just a little bit in terms of having so much publicity and discussion. I think there still is a little bit of a stigma, but the more we talk about it, I think we can get that stigma to go away.
All right. So, in the spirit of the American Neighbor Project, what does being a good neighbor truly mean to you today?
Uh, I think being a good neighbor means loving your neighbor as yourself. And I think it means time, uh, taking the time to see your neighbors, to see what the struggles they might be having, to see how you can maybe help, how you can be kind. And I think recognizing little gestures go a really, really long way. Just being kind and considerate and truly caring makes a world of difference. Really does.
So, if someone is listening and in the middle of their own dark season here right now, what would you want to say to them directly?
I would say, well, sorry you're going through this. You're not alone. Um, I would hope that in our conversation here today that there's a few takeaways that they would have. Um, learn from my mistakes because I made a lot of them and I talked about a lot of them. But I would say um, keep your faith and find hope. There's the secular hope that we talk about. I hope it rains so the crops get some water. I hope the Cubs win. I don't say that, but people around here do. But it's
I'm going
that
to edit that
it's
part out, remember?
it's that it's that kind of hope that is still an uncertainty, right? We're not sure it's going to happen. We hope it will happen. And I think having a deep faith and trust in God and recognizing the hope that God gives, which is a different kind of hope, The way hope is used in the New Testament, it's used as a confident assurance. It's an expectation that we know that what God has promised to us is going to happen. And that we can be, it's again, confident. We can be assured of that. That is the outcome. And I think knowing that there is peace and joy and hope that we can find through our faith and relying on that, um, I think that's such an amazing source of comfort. Um, I wish I always had a strong faith, but I wish I had relied on it more during that time.
Well, Brenda, I want to say thank you for your transparency and your courage of telling this story. I'm sure it was very difficult to get that out, but I think there's so much benefit to people hearing what you went through, that you were able to get through it. What your source of inspiration was through it is just really important for people. I'm working on another one with a positive ending that I'm hoping that I can bring to the show. But this is a huge issue in our culture today. So just thank you for having the courage to be able to be so forthright about this.
Sure, if it helps one person, I'm happy about that. That's my whole goal, is to help other people and to make sure they know they're not alone, and there's a lot of us going through the same thing.
In closing, what stands out most in Brenda's story isn't the hardship that she endured. It's the quiet, steady presence of people who came to step in and instead of stepping away. A neighbor who opened their home, a church that showed up with food and an action plan for an unfinished project, a colleague who looked past the symptoms and saw a person carrying too much for too long. These weren't headline making moments, they were ordinary acts of care, and yet, together, they helped carry a family through one of the hardest seasons of their life. That's really the heart of the American Neighbor Project. Life is not easy. In life, we don't all agree, but when we notice each other, when we reach out and we decide to engage in someone else's struggle and that it's worth stepping into, we become the United States of America. If Brenda's story moved you today, consider this your gentle nudge to get involved in your own neighborhood, your workplace, or your community. Someone near you may quietly be carrying more than you can see. Until next time, keep being the neighbor that someone else might one day thank God for. The American Neighbor Project is grateful for every listener and guest on the show. Each conversation is intended to bring back real one-on-one conversations and to stir thoughts. Whether we agree with each other or not, it doesn't matter. I'm here to learn through conversation. I hope these interviews expand your way of thinking on different topics. Most importantly, I hope it encourages you to talk to your neighbors, especially the ones that you don't think you'll agree with. You'll be surprised. There's more to agree on than not. I can't continue to do this show without amazing guests. If you know an everyday American with an extraordinary story, I want to hear it and maybe bring on a new guest to the show. Please navigate to american-neighbor-project.com /contact and tell me about this amazing story.